In the vast emptiness of the Mojave Desert, there lies a place that has been forgotten by time and forsaken by all who once knew it. This place is Lake Dolores Waterpark, a former oasis of joy now withered into a wasteland of rusted slides and crumbling structures. But the most chilling thing about Lake Dolores is not its decay, but the shadows that lurk there and the whispers that tell of restless spirits haunting its desolate grounds. On a moonless night, when the desert wind howls like a wounded animal, a group of thrill-seeking friends decided to test their courage and explore the abandoned park. They had heard the stories. Everyone had. Stories of strange noises echoing through the empty slides, of ghostly figures seen wandering around the decrepit pools. But they were young and foolish, full of bravado and disbelief. Ghosts were for children's tales, not for them. As they approached the entrance, the gate, half buried in sand, creaked ominously in the wind. They hesitated for a moment, but a dare from the bravest among them pushed the group forward. With a deep breath and a nervous laugh, they crossed the threshold into the park, their footsteps echoing off the concrete, the sound swallowed by the vast silence around them. The air inside the park felt heavier, colder, as if the joy and laughter that once filled the air had been replaced with a lingering dread. The towering slides, once gleaming with water and sunlight, now stood like skeletal remains under the dark sky. The old wave pool, empty of water, gaped like a yawning chasm, its cracked floor littered with debris. The friends stuck close together, their flashlights casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. They reached the main attraction, the towering slides that twisted and turned in eerie silence. One of the friends, a boy named Jake, dared the others to climb to the top. With a smirk and a shrug, they agreed. One by one, they ascended the rusted stairs, the metal groaning under their weight. The higher they climbed, the colder it got, as if they were leaving the world behind and stepping into another darker realm. As they reached the top, a sudden gust of wind slammed into them, nearly knocking them off balance. They laughed nervously, brushing it off as just the desert wind. But then they heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Did you hear that?" Sarah, the only girl in the group, asked, her voice trembling. The others nodded, their bravado fading as the whisper grew louder, more insistent, echoing around them. "Go back," the voice seemed to hiss, chilling them to the bone. Jake, trying to maintain his tough exterior, shouted into the night, "Who's there? Show yourself." But his voice wavered, betraying his fear. The whispering stopped, replaced by a deathly silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, a scream, a blood-curdling, bone-chilling scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The group froze, their eyes wide with terror. "Run!" Jake shouted, and they bolted down the stairs, tripping and stumbling in their haste to get away. But the faster they ran, the louder the scream became, until it was deafening, piercing through their very souls. They reached the bottom and sprinted towards the exit, but the gate that had been half open was now closed, sealed shut as if by an unseen force. Panic set in as they pushed and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, now a chorus of voices, each one more sinister than the last, chanting in a language they couldn't understand. Suddenly, one of the friends, Mark, was yanked backwards with an unseen force. He screamed, his body dragged across the ground, leaving deep marks in the sand. The others tried to grab him, but it was as if an invisible hand was pulling him away. "Help me," he cried, his voice full of terror. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't hold on. He was pulled into the shadows, his screams fading into the distance until there was nothing but silence. Paralyzed with fear, the remaining friends huddled together, their backs to the gate. The whispers grew louder, closer, as if the spirits of the park were circling them, toying with their prey. "Please, let us go," Sarah sobbed, tears streaming down her face. But the spirits did not listen. The air grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to stretch and grow, reaching out towards them. Just as they felt the darkness closing in, a blinding light cut through the night, and a voice, a human voice, shouted from beyond the gate. "Hey, over here." A group of desert campers had stumbled upon the park, drawn by the sounds of screams and cries. With a mighty shove, they forced the gate open, and the friends tumbled out, gasping for air, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They never spoke of what they saw that night. Mark was never found, his disappearance forever a mystery. And the park remains, standing alone in the desert, its gates sealed shut. But sometimes, on a moonless night, when the wind howls through the Mojave, those who dare venture too close to Lake Dolores swear they can hear the whispers, the screams, the cries of those who never escaped the darkness. In the dark, misty woods of Saco, Maine, there lies an abandoned water park that time forgot. Splashtown USA. Once a place filled with laughter, the echo of children's joy, and the splash of water, it now sits in eerie silence, cloaked in the shadows of its grim past. Locals speak in hushed tones about the park's tragic history. The stories began long ago, with tales of a great flood that swept through the town, drowning anything and everything in its path. Splashtown USA was one of the casualties. The water surged through the park like a beast unleashed, toppling slides and swallowing the wave pool whole. Rumors say that several lives were lost in that terrible flood, their bodies never recovered, their souls forever trapped within the twisted ruins. Today, the park is a ghost of its former self. The bright, cheerful colors have faded to a ghastly gray, and the structures creak and groan as if whispering secrets of the past. Ivy and moss cling to every surface, and the slides that once brought joy now twist like sinister serpents. On stormy nights when the wind howls through the empty grounds, some say you can still hear the faint laughter of children, or is it something more ominous? It was on such a night that a group of local teenagers, thrill seekers and non-believers, decided to explore the park. They gathered at the rusted gates, their flashlights flickering against the pitch-black night. The leader of the group, Tom, was the first to step inside, pushing open the creaky gate with a loud, echoing groan that seemed to awaken the park itself. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and a heavy fog rolled in from nowhere, wrapping around them like a wet shroud. The sound of water dripping echoed through the park, a constant reminder of the flood that had claimed so many lives. They made their way to the wave pool, now a deep, murky pit filled with stagnant water. As they approached, the fog thickened and the temperature plummeted. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and the ground beneath their feet felt slick and treacherous. Tom, trying to prove his courage, walked to the edge of the pool and peered into the darkness. Suddenly his flashlight flickered and went out. He cursed under his breath, shaking it to bring it back to life. But as he did, he heard something, a faint ghostly whisper coming from the depths of the pool. He froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, turning into a mournful wail that sent chills down his spine. "Did you hear that?" Tom whispered, his voice trembling. The others nodded, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could speak, the surface of the pool began to ripple, as if something were moving beneath the water. A cold dread settled over them, and they slowly backed away, eyes fixed on the pool. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the water. It was a young girl, her hair tangled and matted, her clothes torn and soaked. Her skin was a sickly gray, and her eyes were empty voids of darkness. She opened her mouth, and a low, guttural sound escaped her lips, a sound that was both a cry for help and a scream of rage. The water around her began to churn violently, splashing up in waves that seemed to reach for the teenagers. Panic set in, and they turned to run, but the fog had become so thick that they could barely see a foot in front of them. They stumbled blindly, their hearts pounding in their chests. The ground seemed to shift beneath them, as if the park itself were trying to trap them. The ghostly whispers grew louder, filling their ears with cries of anguish and despair. One by one, the teenagers became separated in the fog. Tom, alone and terrified, stumbled into the ruins of the old snack bar. He slammed the door shut behind him, his hands shaking. The whispers outside grew louder, and the air became unbearably cold. He could see his breath, feel the icy sting of fear deep in his bones. Then, the whispers stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Tom pressed his ear to the door, listening. Suddenly, a deafening bang rattled the walls and the door flew open with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. He looked up and saw the girl standing in the doorway, her lifeless eyes locked onto his. She moved towards him, her steps slow and deliberate, leaving wet footprints on the floor. Tom scrambled back, his heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The room was small and dark, and the windows were boarded up. He could feel the walls closing in on him, the air growing colder with each passing second. The girl reached out a hand, her fingers long and bony, and a cold smile spread across her lips. "Please." "No," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible, but the girl did not stop. She kept coming, her eyes fixed on him, her mouth opening wider and wider until it was an inhuman gape, emitting a bone-chilling scream that seemed to pierce through Tom's very soul. He covered his ears, but the sound grew louder, echoing inside his head, filling him with a terror he had never known. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The fog lifted, the whispers ceased, and the park fell silent once more. The remaining teenagers, dazed and confused, found each other near the entrance, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. They called out for Tom, but there was no answer. They searched the park, shouting his name into the darkness, but he was gone, vanished without a trace. To this day, no one knows what happened to Tom. Some say he drowned in the wave pool, pulled under by the vengeful spirit of the girl who perished in the flood. Others believe he was taken by the park itself, claimed by the spirits that still linger there, trapped forever in the twisted remains of Splashtown USA. But those who dare to visit the abandoned park swear they can still hear his screams, echoing through the empty slides and overgrown pathways. And on stormy nights, when the fog rolls in and the wind howls through the trees, they say you can see a shadowy figure standing by the wave pool, waiting for the next visitor to join him in his eternal nightmare. Water Wonderland, a name that once echoed with the laughter of children and the splashes of summer. It was a beacon of joy in Odessa, Texas, a place where families gathered under the scorching sun to seek respite in its cool blue waters. But now the park lay abandoned, its waters dried up, its once vibrant slides covered in dust and rust, and its silence broken only by the haunting whispers of the wind. They say the park shut down because of financial problems, a decline in visitors, but those who know the truth know it was something far darker. The last summer it was open, something terrible happened, something that drove the final nail into the park's coffin. It was a hot day in July, and the sun bore down on Water Wonderland with an intensity that made the air shimmer. The park was packed, but amidst the joy and excitement, there was an undercurrent of unease. Lifeguards whispered to each other about the strange things that had been happening. A child claimed to have seen a figure in the wave pool, just beneath the surface, where no one should have been. A young couple swore they heard their names being whispered on the breeze, but when they turned, no one was there. And then, there was the old man. No one knew where he came from, or how he entered the park. He wore a tattered hat that shaded his eyes, making it impossible to see his face. He wandered through the crowds, his head turning slowly, almost mechanically, as if he were searching for something or someone. That day, the water in the wave pool felt colder than usual, sending shivers down the spines of those who entered. People began to avoid it, whispering amongst themselves about the sudden chill in the middle of the Texas heat. But not everyone stayed away. Around noon, a group of teenagers dared each other to jump into the wave pool, to brave the eerie cold that seemed to seep into their bones. Among them was a girl named Emily. She was fearless, known for her love of thrills and her disdain for anything supernatural. Ghosts were just stories, she'd say, meant to scare children. And so, with a laugh and a daring grin, she dove in. The water closed over her head, and for a moment, all was silent. The surface rippled, then calmed. Her friends waited, expecting her to burst through the water with a triumphant yell. But seconds stretched into a minute, and Emily did not emerge. Panic set in. Lifeguards blew their whistles, and a search began. But the more they searched, the deeper the dread grew. The water, once crystal clear, had turned murky, as if a dark cloud had descended beneath the surface. Divers went in, their faces pale as they felt unseen hands brush against their skin. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Emily. Her friends, now huddled together, swore they saw something in the water. A shadow moving just beneath the surface, too fast to be a swimmer, too large to be a fish. And then, just as the sun began to set, they heard it. A soft, keening wail that echoed across the park, sending chills down the spines of all who heard it. That night, the park was evacuated. The gates were closed, the lights turned off, and a silence fell over Water Wonderland. But inside, in the darkness, the wave pool remained restless. The waters churned and bubbled, and some say if you stood close enough, you could hear Emily's voice calling out from the depths, her cries mingling with the sound of rushing water. The park never reopened after that. Officials claimed it was due to maintenance issues, declining profits, but those who were there that day knew better. They spoke in hushed tones about the curse of Water Wonderland, about the spirits that lingered in its waters waiting for their next victim. Years passed, and nature began to reclaim the park. Vines crept over the slides, weeds sprouted through the cracks, and the wave pool, once a place of joy, became a stagnant, murky pond. But still, the rumors persisted. Locals say that on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, you can hear the faint sounds of splashing and laughter coming from the abandoned park. They say that if you're brave enough to venture inside, you might catch a glimpse of Emily, still searching for a way out, her ghostly figure wandering the grounds with that same fearless grin, now twisted in eternal terror. But be warned, those who enter Water Wonderland do not always return. Some say the park is hungry, that it feeds on fear and despair, drawing the living into its haunted depths, and those who are lost in its waters become part of its legend, their souls forever trapped in the murky abyss, whispering warnings to those who dare to listen. So if you ever find yourself in Odessa, Texas, and you hear the whispers of Water Wonderland on the wind, turn away. For the park is a graveyard now, and its ghosts are always watching, waiting for the next soul to join them in their watery tomb.